Right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to MLC's next talk. Work smart, not hard, a neurodivergent perspective. Can I just get a few emotes in the chat just to make sure everybody can hear me okay? Can everybody hear me? Let's just put a few GIFs in there. There we are. Anina can hear us. That's good.
Am I coming out okay?
It would seem so. It seems to be nice and live. So, as I've just introduced, we have our lovely Reese here with us today. So, do you just want to introduce yourself, Reese?
Yeah. So I'm Reese. I do art direction, concept artist for MLC. I also do a lot of freelance work. I've been in the field for about 5 years. I would say 3 years, like full time. But yeah, I've done a lot of work. I've done some work for the metaverse, NFTs. I've done a lot of illustrations, book illustrations, comic book work, various games, as well as board games. So that's mostly a lot of the clientele I have, which is a lot of different stuff, I guess. But
Yeah,
yeah.
you handle a lot of mediums. That's fantastic, is that?
Mm-hmm.
And I will quickly introduce myself. You won't really hear much from me, as Reese will be leading this chat, but I'm Rob. I'm the lead animator here at MLC, and I've basically been dragged in because I like to talk a lot. But this time, I'm going to be letting Reese lead the way and discuss his workflows and how he keeps himself together while he works. So let's dive straight in, and Reese, please take it away.
Yeah. So I have 30 minutes, so I'll kind of just start with a little bit of the beginning of Reese. So, kind of when we started having the conversation about having this event, Anina brought up neurodivergence, which is something I found really interesting and cool because I've never really thought of myself as neurodivergent. But over the past few years, I would say I'm 31 now. My early 20s is when I started really taking my mental health seriously. Kind of raised in one of those households where mental health isn't seen as really like a really something that it's something you could kind of power through. So it wasn't until 20s that I actually started talking to someone professional. Um, I've been diagnosed. My biggest thing is ADHD, which you'll see me kind of moving around a lot, which is pretty normal. It's like the what is it, anagram or whatever is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. A lot of people like to say attention deficit hearing disorder because we don't like to pay attention a lot. Um, but I also have depression, anxiety. Um, haven't been fully diagnosed, but they do say I probably have OCD and dyslexia as well because hard time reading. So I have a kind of the whole shebang. But it's kind of cool because looking at it with the neurodivergence, going back to that, I've always kind of thought of myself as weird, ever since I was a kid. And whenever I used to do stuff, I would just be like, oh, I'm just a little different. And neurodivergence is cool because it's like your brain thinks differently than other people. And it wasn't until probably just a few years ago I started looking at my. It says disorder, so it's kind of like classified as a disability, but I kind of see it as a little bit of like my own little superpower. Because ever since I was a kid, I've always been really like stuck on visuals. I've always had a really hard time reading, so I was had a hard time in school. Really hard to get teachers to pay attention to me because I really needed for them to show me visually what I needed to learn. So it's kind of hand in hand that I ended up driving myself toward artwork because everything was visual. So I'd be drawing in class. And when I found myself drawing in class, I found myself being able to pay attention better, being able to listen a little bit more. So that's kind of how a lot of what I come to understand as my style or my way of working um, came to itself is I wasn't able to sit and learn like people would study masterworks and stuff like that or read a lot of things on like how to draw and everything like that, and it was really difficult for me. So it was a lot of like self-taught work, and it left me in a position where I had to um, kind of figure out every single piece I worked on. And it was about 5 years ago that I got reached out by an artist named Dino Atomic, and he was working on a private project, and he just kind of stumbled upon my work. And at that time, I was just drawing all the time, posting on Instagram, and I didn't really have much of what I would call style because I was trying everything. I was working with acrylics. Um, I was doing murals. I did a mural for a preschool and I did book illustrations. I was donating a lot of artwork. So like I was doing artwork for a lot of like kids foundations. There was a really one called My Monster Project. So I was doing everything I could because I didn't really have a direction. And once I was able to land that job with Dino, that I was able to kind of fixate on, I really like illustrations and telling a story. So once it started becoming a regular work thing, I had to figure out a way how to make it so I could create artworks that were both, unique, readable, but also made sense. And I couldn't just grab my client and throw them through my process because it would be like, have you ever seen that meme with Charlie and he has the board and it has all the yarn and stuff and he looks like a crazy person? That was like my sketch pad, or that was like my reference images. So I learned that the kind of primary process that a lot of people go down is they'll do thumbnails, they'll do sketches, they'll do refined sketches, like pre-final piece and then final piece. It's kind of an easy line to go down. And I found myself going from talking to the client to send my final piece because I get so excited. And it's like one of those things about having ADHD, having that mindset, because what's really beautiful about it is I can find excitement and want when it comes to a project. So when I have a client come and sit down and talk to me, they introduce me to the game, they introduce me to the work, I can bounce off that energy that they have. And I feel a lot of people will like, take in what they're saying and write it down and kind of think it through. But like while they're talking, I'm like popping in images in my head, or I'll sit in a meeting with a client and I'll have Pinterest open and they'll say a keyword that means something to me and I'll be looking it up or thinking about shapes and colors and all that stuff. And so I think that's kind of how I ended up getting into art direction, is because my first starting process that I found works with clients is a lot of reference gathering. And typically I won't share the reference gathering. Working as an art director, I now get to share that process because making a style guide requires a lot of reference imagery. But what I feel is something I kind of am powerful at is being able to hear something that the client says, find that they have interest in it. So when they're saying something like, I really want like a dark meadow and I really want these like little wisps to kind of be popping through. I have all this imagery in my head that's popping through, and I'm like, I guess, throwing kind of a collage at the screen and gathering all that information. Once I have that together, it's kind of gets a little weird from there because most people will start thumbnailing in their sketch pad, or they'll start trying to figure out some images, doing little rough things. And I find that having ADHD and I get so excited, I want to already start on the final piece, which everybody wants to do. But with me, it's kind of dire because I can lose interest really quick. So I had to create a process that I can skip kind of that thumbnailing and hop into it without losing interest. And it's kind of interesting. I'll go for a walk, or I will sit, I'll pet my cat. And what it is it's actually a thing called, like, well, it's really popular with ADHD people because you can't really sit and think. You want to hop up. You get distracted. I'm medicated, so I'm able to have a little bit of a ability to sit and kind of think about it. But most of the time, I get super distracted, especially someone who loves video games or loves a good comic book. It's hard to sit there. So what I would do is pretty much I'll just pace back and forth, or I'll go outside and I'll go for a walk. And it's actually called like movement therapy. And that's where you kind of let your brain go loose, listen to heavy metal or whatever you need to do, and just kind of go out there and think about it and picture in your head what this is. And that is my thumbnailing and my sketching. Because I've learned that once I start putting things down on paper, it starts to lose interest. And so once I have mulled over it, I can usually do it in maybe like an hour or two. And then kind of thinking of what I want to have this final image to look like. That's when I grab those images, everything that popped into my head, and I start finding shapes. This is really beautiful thing with creature design because creatures are kind of like whatever you can make it out of. So like, I went to art college and I've read a bunch of things about it, but over the years, being able to just be such a visual person, I've kind of have this weird database in my head of like random facts, like Baroque style, or a game I worked on recently had a Gustave Doré vibe to it, which is like biblical ink carving and stuff like that. So I'll be like thinking about the shapes and the creatures and what I want the things to look like. And then I'll grab those images and I'll actually photo bash my sketches. Um, and this is something that will let me quickly throw some shapes around, makes the silhouette figure out what I had in my mind and the shapes and colors. And then that's something that I will actually draw over and give to a client. And then that way, my sketching process is gone from something that would have probably taken me maybe 5, 6 hours to like figure out the image. And I could usually do it in like an hour. And it'll be rough, but it'll at least kind of get down on the paper what I want without me losing that kind of fire that I feel for the project. From there, it's kind of just your standard process of finishing the sketch, working with the client, bouncing off ideas, and doing changes and stuff like that. But um, you know, in between those things, sometimes if you're just not landing an image that the client really wants, and you're still wanting to keep that fire, it's really good to, especially someone whose brain is constantly firing on old pistons, it's really good to stop. So I usually will have like about an hour to 2 hours. I will usually have to stop what I'm doing work wise and just kind of find something else to do. Typically, I try to keep it in the art world. So my biggest thing right now is Warhammer model making, painting. I went to Japan and I sunk too much money into Gundam models. I don't really do Gundam, but it's something that allows me to keep that fire going in my head while also being able to step away from a project, especially if it's something like an image I'm not happy with. It will at least get something I do enjoy, like art wise, to work on and come back to it, have fresh eyes on it, find that fire again. Um, so that's a lot of like, you know, kind of the build up to where I go to my final image. And, art's not quick, especially with AI. It feels like everything can be made quick, but when you're really trying to do a final image, it still takes time. I have a client that regularly likes to send me a bunch of AI images, and using Photo Bash, I changed the image like 90%, even though the final image would have probably taken me 60 hours to paint because it's so detailed. With AI, it can drop it down to maybe like 20 hours. But still, it requires a lot of sitting down and being able to work quickly. So, having a bunch of tools on hand, I probably have, I would say, 7,000 brushes that I use, so to speed up the process. But that kind of stuff can also be really iffy because if you use something like Kyle T. Webster, he has this brush set that everybody uses, and usually you can actually tell when someone uses that brush set. Or there's a popular one that was on Instagram that makes it look like old illustrations. You can see that a lot. So you have to be able to, not rely on that too much. So that's where like blending, photo bashing, those brush sets, and then being able to paint all in one come together. And I feel as an ADH person, being able to grab everything all at once, just kind of like throwing it all on the table and just kind of putting it together, it feels a lot like collaging, which is like kind of how I imagine my art pieces go. Because it is nice to just be able to sit and draw. But thing with having something like ADHD, you want to make sure that you are able to, you know, keep that kind of momentum going. And if you find yourself not being able to um, find that fire again, it's okay to be able to just kind of step away and think about it, which I think is something that everybody can relate to. Um, but with someone who is neurodivergent, it's a necessity for us because um, if you're forcing yourself to have passion, it's really difficult to keep that want, and that's the kind of thing that can lead to anxiety and depression. Is when you're forcing yourself to do a lot of stuff that you don't like. And so it's really good to be able to find passion elsewhere to bring it back to this, because it kind of is almost like detoxing yourself. And that's something really important that I have to do in between work, or in between actually the sketches and the final piece and stuff like that. So um, it's it's interesting because I feel like what talking to someone who is neurodivergent, how they can benefit your company or benefit like just art in general, is you're working with someone who is taking in a lot of information all at once and collecting it for you. It may come off unorganized, but when I've been doing it for a few years now, and I've been able to have a process where it looks like I'm throwing all the cards on the table and shuffling them together and stuff like that. But to me, it feels like it it just feels like I'm shoving everything into a tight ball and forming it into something beautiful. And it's really cool because I find that having ADHD, I know a couple artists who have ADHD, we tend to work a lot quicker. Not saying that it's like it's better because it's faster. And sometimes, you can actually risk a lot of quality that way. But when you're having stuff coming through constantly, being able to have someone who has that kind of quick acting ideation of like a creature design, let's say, it's good to have someone who can pull a bunch of images and throw something together really quick. And that's why AI and photo bashing is something I find is really like it talks to me because it's taking stuff like those little things, the popping of images in my head, and allowing me to just throw it on the page without having to think of it and figure out the anatomy and stuff like that. So um, kind of using a lot of tools is really important too. Like I use 3D models and VR to kind of actually set up my creatures and my scenes and stuff like that because just like how I learned how to do art, I don't have that mental time to sit and figure a lot of stuff out. So it is cool to be able to work with people who are like that, especially because like when you're working in art direction, you need to make sure that you have a style guide out for the other artists. And it's cool because when I'm talking to someone, I'm pulling all this information. I can just kind of organize it and then send it out to the client. They're like, "Hey, actually, that's a lot like what I was thinking about. I don't want it to be scary, but I want it to be dark. I want it to be mystical." And having all that information collected when they're talking, and being able to just throw that out to them, in one day is I find very helpful, especially because that way it's going to benefit your team, who are people who need to collect that information, organize it, and put out artwork that looks good. So art direction and having ADHD is kind of it works hand in hand because it's also like someone will throw something, you're like, "Ooh, this is cool. Look at this. Look at this. Look at this." And I get distracted in people's artwork, which sometimes will allow you to see things that some people might overlook. Um, and yeah, I mean, as far as like getting final pieces out and everything like that, um, you know, I think it is really good to focus on quality. And that's like the time where you need to make sure you have everything figured out because everybody likes the final process, which is filling in the blanks and detailing because it doesn't require as much mental energy. So being able to force all that in the like early sketch eras, skipping all the thumbnails, skipping sketches, and just landing kind of on that final piece and being able to start detailing from there, it's more therapeutic. That's something that I can sit for a couple hours without having to stop. But it is interesting because it's like starting the race as fast as you can and then slowing down. And but yeah, I mean, trying to organize it for clients and someone who doesn't have that kind of neurodivergency, you have to kind of find a middle between it. So I usually land on skipping the first thumbnails, and typically when you see my sketches, they're pretty well thought out already and well done. And the cool part is, since I've already kind of set them up in that way, it's really easy for me to photo bash the sketch that I have to recreate it so the client has something easy to work with. And it's not like really starting over a really finalized image because a lot of that process is being able to take something that's almost looking done and being able to change it really quickly. Um, Kind of working in that process is really important. So, you know, um, it's it can get sometimes really tricky though, because there is some pluses and minuses. The minuses is like if you're working on a project, let's say you're working on something that's 2D that needs to be turned into 3D, um, you are going to have to do a lot of cutting and stuff like that. Because when I'm working, I'm throwing everything at the canvas like a crazy artist with a paintbrush and stuff like that, and being able to cut it up, separating the arms out, painting underneath it and stuff, which is a process that a lot of people are used to. Um, it's something that is definitely I find more difficult for me going back and doing all that cutting and stuff like that and setting it up for animation because it is something that you kind of have to plan ahead. And it's I like to see myself as the person who's like that crazy artist who's throwing everything on the canvas and stuff like that. So going in and separating things out can sometimes be a little stressful. But I've end up learning a lot of stuff over time that help me with that. Procreate does a really good job on layering and stuff like that. That makes it really easy to set up for animation. But I don't know. Other than that, mostly I try to keep everything as organized possible when presenting, but behind the scenes, it's kind of crazy. And I feel like that's a representation of me as an artist because um, a lot of my stuff looks really detailed. And um, that's because that's the time when I enjoy art, where I'm able to relax, when I'm able to, therapeutically fill in the blank and stuff like that. Because the beginning part's kind of really hectic, like a chicken with its head cut off and gathering all this information and throwing it out there. Um, it's kind of just one of those processes that I find is enjoyable, fun, and it's cool because a lot of people take it positively because they feel that energy, they feel that like kind of want and excitement, and um, it's a fun process. It makes art fun for me, being able to have that kind of fire and then slow down at the end and create really cool artwork. Um, but other than that, I mean, I feel like I did the ADHD thing and just rambled crazy, which is kind of what I do. But yeah, I don't know. Other than that, I think I would like to go to questions. But Rob, if you have any questions for me.
Not quite questions, but I really liked the fact that you mentioned you can't force passion. I find that really insightful. So, and I think that can go for anybody, whether you're neurodivergent or not. The idea that a passion's not supposed to be forced, it's something that comes from your heart and it comes from your mind. It's something that it just happens. When somebody's passionate about things, you mentioned Gundam, and I miniature paint as my kind of happy place. Like,
Hmm.
I'm not neurodivergent, but I recognize you need that time to move away from your work. And yeah, I really liked how you said that. So I actually do have a question, but I'm going to try and think how to phrase this. So you mentioned, you see your ADHD and your other conditions almost as superpowers. Would you say that these conditions you have actually help you be a better artist in some regards because you are able to go from, you said you can skip the entire thumbnailing and you can get straight to, almost the final piece. Would you say that's a net benefit? Like, no client's going to really complain about that? Or have you found some clients would actually prefer you to, look, can you force yourself to do the thumbnails? Because I'd rather, what have you found that's like?
Yeah, I mean, there has been some pieces like we had a client who really wanted me to throw down like I think 100 buildings to figure out like the silhouettes and shapes like that. Um, that stuff is, it's something that's you kind of have to do. I find that I want to do it really quick, so being able to do stuff really rough and thumbnail, I find that using brushes that are really strong silhouette brushes and stuff like that, it's quick, easy, and it does kind of give me that fire. As far as like how I see it, like kind of like a superpower is that kind of starting momentum. I feel like when you're working into a project, you give the clients or you give the artist something to work on, and you're kind of waiting for them to get the thumbnails and figure it out. With me, it's kind of like I try to hop into it right away. So sometimes when they're requesting thumbnails and stuff like that, I kind of use that fire to attack the thumbnails or something that's like really rough. And then in between going from like thumbnails to sketches, I'll give myself a break, because it's important to pace when you're doing that thing. But I typically try to skip those things so I can get everything running right up into the sketch area. But slowing down and focusing on like the really rough stuff, it's good to take it in like two spots. So when I have someone who's like, I really want rough images, I will treat it like it is. It keeps cutting out. No. I just read the thing that it keeps cutting out. Am I coming up clear for you, Rob?
Yes, that's fantastic. I'll
Okay.
go into a follow-up.
Oh, am I still cutting out though?
No, you're sounding nice and clear now.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I mean, just like being able to attack it in two parts, separating the image out, that allows me to kind of give that rough style that maybe they want starting off, and then being able to pace myself in between that.
Awesome. Great answer. I'll go with one more for me and then we'll move on over to the community questions. So this is more based around the neurodivergence itself rather than working into your workflow. While working freelance or with ourselves, have you ever felt the need, I believe the term's masking, have you ever felt the need to hide your conditions from people? Do you think that they're going to prejudge you? So you kind of, I don't want to say act normal, because you're not unnormal, but have you ever felt the
Yeah,
need to mask yourself to?
definitely early on, especially because kind of discovering a lot about your mental health is a difficult process. So when I was starting art, I didn't want to tell people about it. I wear it like a badge of pride now. But before, like it got really popular for everybody to kind of like, on TikTok and stuff like that. You see a lot of people self-diagnosing with ADHD, and I'm not trying to downplay people's problem. Anxiety and everything is up, and I imagine that a lot of people who do have these symptoms are finding their symptoms, but kind of having that mindset of like, am I really neurodivergent, or am I just a weirdo? So like that kind of self-doubt and self-abandonment is prevalent, and it happens, especially with someone who has to deal with depression. um it's that's the part, like how I treat my artwork, being able to take breaks and being able to tell yourself like, no, I should be proud of myself. I look at the world differently, and that's actually incredible, because in a world where AI is taking everything we have and kind of normalizing it, being able to step away from what everybody else thinks almost does feel like a superpower. But now I don't hide it. I'm proud of it, and it's kind of cool because I could be like, "Oh, hey, sorry, I forgot your name. Um, my brain's weird." Uh, but I respect you. I call everybody friend because I don't want them to feel like I don't respect them if I forget a name or something like that. But I know that, in the long run, it's going to benefit me, and I can look back at the things that were issues and stuff like that. And I will always, like, if I don't find it necessary, I won't tell a client. But about a year ago or 2 years ago, I would probably wouldn't have said anything to anybody. I would just kind of kept it to myself. But lately, it's a badge of honor.
Yeah, that kind of shows you've kind of grown into yourself, right? And
Mm,
that's nothing but a net positive for everybody involved, I reckon.
yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, sir. So we'll move on to some community questions, starting with a Miss Cameron Keywood. And that is, I started my own indie studio with the aim of helping graduates get their first studio experience and have the trifecta of autism, depression, anxiety with a dash of imposter syndrome. How do you cope with the negatives of your neurodivergence?
Um, I mean, I feel like we went over that one a little bit. Let me hold on. I'm trying to find the question because that's one thing is like I like to have the questions right in front of me. May 24.
My accent can be quite hard to understand as well, so I won't hold it against you.
No, you're totally fine. Um, but it is gosh, where is the message? Can you ping it to me? See,
Yes.
this is one of the difficulties for me, is being able to hear something and then I like to have the questions. Yeah.
There you are. I've
That's
PM'd
what
you it.
I'm missing. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Um, how do I cope with the negatives of neurodivergence is being truthful with people is really important. And, telling someone like, hey, we had this conversation, but I want to clarify on something because I want to make sure I get all the information. Having a voice is really important when it comes to something like neurodivergence, because something that may come really easy to someone can be really difficult for someone else. I.e., Rob reading a question out to me, I was like, oh, I need to read that question too. I heard half the question. And that's like some of the issues. So being able to speak, be like, I'm sorry, this is like some of the things that happened and I just need some repeating. Or if something, like if I'm throwing around a bunch of ideas and you're like, oh, I said I didn't really like this too much. It's because we can throw a lot of information out, but sometimes not everything is going to catch, because our brains like to go in scattered directions. So it's like it's really cool to be able to hear them out, let them talk. I had a client who, um, they had ADHD themselves, and working alongside them, it was really cool because you can talk to them and they actually understand how you feel. You're like, I'm so sorry, I couldn't hear what you said here or something. And I remember messaging them and I felt really bad, but they had ADHD and they're like, oh, I completely forgot what you said too. And then had another meeting, so um, it's, that's the one thing is it's more of a hurdle for myself more than other people. Sometimes if you're dealing with someone who doesn't understand, um, having that communication, be like, hey, my brain works a little different. It's cool. We can work together. But yeah, I would say just that's the difficult thing for me is I need to make sure that I let them know beforehand if it's going to be an issue. And typically it's not. I would say almost all the people that we've worked with doesn't really know I have ADHD, but usually I'll try to keep it very personal. I'll message them privately. I don't want it to be something, I don't want them to think like I can't do it, but I try to show that in my work, that I'm like, I'm quick, I can do this quick and stuff, but hey, I might need a little clarification, but yeah, I would say probably that. Words are hard, messages are hard, voices are great.
Fantastic.
Pictures are best.
Next up, we have a question from our very own Anina, and she's asking, balancing work and well-being as an artist can be hard, particularly as a neurodivergent person who is either masking or working twice as hard to read the room. How do you make sure you take sufficient breaks to decompress?
This was a tough one because for a long time it was kind of like that scenario, like a chicken with its head's cut off. It's just running around crazy, like everything is going on at once. That was very common for a while. And it wasn't until pretty recently that I started kind of forcing a schedule. Like I have a weekly planner that's actually behind my computer right now. And I list everything on Monday that I could think of. Tuesday, I wake up, list everything I could think of. And it still comes off very messy, but being able to give myself like kind of that sit down, figure myself out, and then continue, that's kind of give myself 30 minutes,
Super.
I would say, yeah, that you have to, alarms. I have a lot of alarms. That's like probably the best way I would recommend taking a break. Having a lunch break, especially working with freelance, you're your own boss. You need to make sure that you have like something that's going to grab your attention, being able to snag your eyes really quick, because that's what ADHD is. A butterfly flies by and you're just like, that's having something that does that. So I have 7 alarms, I think, daily, and they'll just let me know what time of the day it is. Stuff like that. It's just helpful for me. Auditory, I guess.
Awesome. And I'll throw another piece of advice for all of you out there. This goes if you're neurodivergent or not. Try not to work in your own bedroom. Having your bed there basically means you're coming out of bed, you're going to work, you're working late, you're going to bed, you're thinking about work, you'll get back up and you'll get back on the computer. Don't do it. I think that goes for everybody who's freelance. Have yourself a nice separate office. You'll thank yourself later.
Ooh, also, dress like you're going to a job when you're working at home. I don't know why. It's just something in your head. It just makes it feel like you're working, So like wear what you would wear outside at home.
Oh, I don't follow that advice. I'm usually in my pajamas and dressing gown, so listen to Reese, not me.
Yeah, I'm telling you, if you throw on a business suit, you're going to feel really classy. You're going to want to start doodling. I'm telling you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Chelsea, and they are asking, how do you deal
Did I freeze or did Rob
with
freeze?
avoiding?
Uh-oh, I think we've got a technical issue with Rob. There we go. Are you back?
Oh, no. I think I'm back.
You're back. I can hear you now.
Sorry about that. That's my internet catching up with me. So I'll repeat the question from Chelsea, and they have asked, how do you deal with avoiding burnout?
I feel burnout is something that happens a lot more when you have ADHD. It happens quicker. Not saying that people who don't have ADHD don't get burnout, but I find personally that when I go out a project and I give it 100 right away, when I'm going through that process of throwing it all out, and let's say a client is like, I don't like any of this, that can almost instantly give me burnout, especially if you're working 50 hours a week or something, working on projects and stuff like that. and you're having something that's kind of repeating and everything like that, that's the point where you need to step away and care for yourself. If you're starting to have anxiety, that's your body telling you, hey, I'm technically sick, you know. So you need to go and do something that brings you happiness. I would actually recommend avoiding electric devices. You know, these things are designed to grab your attention and hold you in, so they can be very distracting. And sometimes, especially if you're looking in the news and stuff like that, it's really stressful. I would say put down some electronics, do something you enjoy. I enjoy model making. I love working with wood. You know, go hang out with some friends. You know, I don't recommend going and drinking, but if it's the end of the day, you know, have a beer. But it is good to be able to step away. You know, if the client is needing something really, really rushed, you know, you are a human being. You know, give yourself an hour, give yourself 2 hours, step away. It's okay to start over. You know, I mean, if you have something that's due in 10 minutes, don't start over. But it's, you know, you need to take care of yourself. And I find that when I'm feeling really bad burnout, that I can't go and start playing video games. That's more of a distraction. You know, stepping away, breathing, going and having like a cup of coffee at the cafe down the street, and just kind of clearing your mind, listening to your favorite music, reading a book, and just setting a timer. You know, if it's something that really needs to be done really quick, you are allowed to take breaks. You know, so it's really important that you find something outside work to kind of do a little bit of the heavy lifting for you. And that's why I really support people who do hobbies. That's why I think someone should, if they're interested in picking up a guitar, pick up a guitar and use that as a mechanism to decompress. If it's bringing you stress, it's not a decompressant. You know, so it's good to find those things that are going to calm you, because once the anxiety starts, it's like exercising. If you're working a muscle and stuff like that and it really starts to hurt, that's when you're supposed to stop and give it some time to heal. And that's why you know, burnout starts, is because you're like, I have to get this done, I really need to work on this and stuff like that. And that's you're abandoning yourself at that point. So it's really good to take care of yourself while you are working. Even though we're drawing dragons and stuff like that, and it sounds like a dream come true, it is a job and it does hurt sometimes. So it's okay to breathe and pick up something to paint, you know. Or I'm not going to say don't play video games. Play video games, it's really fun, but make sure that you at least limit yourself.
Super, thank you. Next up we have Fernando. Quite a long one. It is really good to see you talking about your working process and also your superpower. Point of view was really different for me. As you guys know, I have autism and also got diagnosed with ADHD recently. And for me, I just thought about it as a huge debuff for social interactions and keeping focus while working. So my real question is that I wanted to hear you talk about how you keep focus while working. I really enjoy the first part of the process, but the final one is a real pain. I keep getting distracted and just can't come back to it work. I just can't come back to work. Please help.
So the final process, I'm guessing, like sitting down and enjoying it. Um, it's tough because, you know, we're all different. As a fellow person with ADHD, you might be able to relate to that whole distraction thing. You know, I really recommend talking to someone professional or talking to someone that you really care about when it comes to dealing with that anxiety. If you're having a really tough time with a project, having someone to communicate, having someone to look at it. So sharing your artwork is really important, because you may be able to find something that you didn't realize was really cool. You know, that's something that I find is really helpful. Is like, I'm very lucky to have a wife who is an artist, and I can just be like, hey, how does this look? And she's like, garbage. Like, cool. You know, but it's cool because, you know, having MLC is really neat, because you have a bunch of artists that can have that point of view. But if you're having a really tough time, and you need something to kind of, I guess if you're losing that fire, you know, stepping away, I've said this multiple times, is really important. But if you're finding like you just can't go back to that project, it may be good to start looking at other artworks, finding other processes that other people do that you can maybe implement. Something I find with my ADHD is I'll like grab a bunch of brushes and start throwing it on the canvas, and it looks awful and stuff like that. But that's okay, because every artwork looks awful until it looks good, you know. And it's it is patience, and I feel like confidence, maybe going back and looking at where you were really strong in other pieces is good. And it's a good distraction because you could be like, I really like what I did here in these shadows. I actually used a purple instead of a black. It made it a little more vibrant. Let me see if I can use that in this piece. I really recommend learning a little bit of photo bashing techniques because you can really take something that someone has created. You definitely don't want to use their stuff, of course, but being able to just use their colors or use their values and being able to just, instead of starting over, just change the image a lot. And I think when you are not happy with the detailing phase, I think you need to go back one phase earlier and start that over again. Because the detailing phase should just feel like cleanup. I think the final sketch phase should be, if the client's happy with it, it's good to just keep detailing it and see where they're at with happiness and stuff like that, and being able to really distract yourself and give yourself a breath of fresh air. If they're not happy with it, you're not happy with it, you need to take a step backward and start that piece over, because you're just going to cause yourself more anxiety, more stress. And get yourself in Discord, message a friend. I mean, message me. I'll hang out in Discord and talk to you while you're drawing. I'm not really good conversation, but just having that kind of option with MLC is really cool. Being able to sit when you need it with someone, go to a cafe and draw around people. If you have an iPad, it's really cool. I think it's really good to get other eyes on it if you're not feeling it.
Awesome, thank you. And we have Varric next. As someone else with ADHD, I tend to facilitate between hyperfocus and meandering attention. While we're capable of amazing productivity during that hyperfocus, I wonder what ways you tamp down those needs to unfocus so that you can resume as quickly as possible.
What are ways you can tamp down the needs to unfocus so that you can resume as quickly? Yeah, I mean, especially because when you're going through that hyperfocus phase and you're past that, it is kind of like, it feels like a burnout. It's good to, I would say, treat it in waves. So my process is like, I go up on the roller coaster and then I go down really quick and then it mellows out. That might not be the same for another person who is neurodivergent. So it would be good to figure out where your waves are. So like in your sketch phase or when you're roughing out the images, that's when you need your focus and stuff like that. And once you get to that peak and just kind of writing it out, that's when you need to find, the stages where it's not going to take as long, or it's going to be something that doesn't require as much brain power. Those are the times where you need to kind of treat it almost like a break. So for me, like, I need to gather a lot of images. I need to put it all together and photo bash it and stuff like that. And then I'm like, okay, I figured that out. Now I'm just going to start looking at color palettes. I'm going to start throwing some colors around. I'm going to use some gradient maps. That stuff doesn't require much brain power. And then once I figure that out, ride that wave again and start getting into the nitty gritty of it. It's really finding your own pace, because if you're always trying to find that wave, you're going to have a crash right afterwards. So sometimes it's good to maybe even cut yourself off. If you're riding that wave, kind of slow down a little bit, because you don't want to burn yourself out. So like, let's say you're working on a bunch of sketches and you're feeling it and everything like that. That's why I would set up a timer to be like, hey, take a little break, come back to it. How cool is it to go back to a piece that you're excited about? So that's why sometimes that kind of fire is good to, let it cool down a little bit and not burn yourself. Because once you get to that phase where you're like really starting to just hate a piece because you just went all out on it, it's okay to breathe and slow down a little bit. Don't go to 100 right away.
Fantastic. So we have a couple more questions here, and then we will, any more questions after this point, if you just pop them in the chat, I'm sure Reese will be happy to answer them via message as well. But our next one we have from Luna. This is more from a perspective of an employer. Is anything you could recommend to me as a placemaker to support and be more friendly to neurodivergent folk?
It's tough because neurodivergence, it's thinking differently, and being a person who is neurodivergent, it is always going to be something that I am going to have insecurities about. So giving people a safe place is important. Some businesses will just kind of throw a Discord channel and be like, this is a safe place, talk here, and it doesn't get used. I think it's good to have let's say question blocks, places where people can like question anonymously. Giving people an avenue who are neurodivergent, be like, hey, we don't want you to have to explain yourself. If you want it to be anonymous, you can ask some questions here, or hey, I just want to let you, or like having an avenue. Like I love Destiny 2, and I joined this Discord channel, and they had a really beautiful way of making me feel welcome there. Is they had a channel, and in the channel they were like, everybody's accepted here. If there's anything that you feel might be difficult for you, or something that you feel that you're really strong at, this is a place where you can kind of say it. And that didn't have the anonymous kind of factor to it. So like sometimes it's, some people are not as open about it, they might not want to say it. You can also give them an avenue to talk personally with you. If you feel like you have the budget for it, finding a person who's professional at communicating. Or if you have someone who is open, like let's say for me, if MLC was like, hey, we have someone who's neurodivergent, but they want to talk to someone who kind of understands what's that like. Being able to communicate with your team and be like, would you be comfortable with me having you talk to this person? Or if you're having a team and everybody's, on the same level, and you have one person who's neurodivergent and everything like that, being like, hey, everybody, just letting you know, if you have any issues, you are safe to communicate with me. I also have some people here. If you need some information, here's some really great PDFs and stuff, like gathering some information. Anina sent me this PDF about neurodivergency, and I love that. And being able to just know that people are thinking about me makes everything better. So just letting them know, like, you're thinking about them, that you respect them, you don't want them to feel different, or respecting the fact that they're different. Hey, if you feel like you're stronger in thumbnailing because you're able to gather information really quickly, would you prefer if I had you work on this side while I have other people who are able to sit for 7 hours and paint details, focus on this? Being able to be open-minded, letting them know that there is an avenue. If they want to take it, that's up to them. So I would say that's like the best course of action.
Fantastic, thank you. And our final one from our very own Ludmilla. Do you have difficulties to shut off from work mode?
Yes, I did, especially when I didn't have kind of my life a little more scheduled. I would say last year I was working from 60 to 80 hours a week when I could have been working 40 or 50. And the thing was, I'm like, I need to work. And I would wake up and work, and I'd go to bed and work. And it really kind of made everything go out of flux. And being able to shut off from work mode, I had to somewhat force myself. And I had to talk to a professional about that, to help me set up a way that, as a person with ADHD, can kind of find ways to tell myself, stop. You are working for somebody, but there are laws for working. You should not be working more than 8 hours. And if you feel it's actually negatively impacting you, that's when you need to kind of have some restraints. I have auditory restraints. I have alarms that go off that let me know when something's happening. That's something I find really kind of cuts me back, or stops me from being in that work mode. Because, as much as I love drawing constantly and stuff like that, if you cannot tell yourself to stop at some points, it's going to start not feeling like work and more like a prison, if you're trapped constantly working. But, money's great, but sometimes you shouldn't take on everything. It's good to respect yourself. If you're getting like 4 projects and it's causing you a lot of anxiety, find the project that's least important and ask them if you could push it back a couple days. People are understanding, especially if you're truthful with them. So it's good to have that, I guess, self-control. And if you feel that you don't have self-control over it, if you feel like it kind of gets out of hand, that's when it's good to talk to somebody, talk to a friend, talk to a person who may have similar situations. I find that talking to a professional is really great when it comes to, if you're feeling like you're trapped, because you're not. It's your body telling you that you need to heal. And so, yeah, it's important to be able to cut yourself off. And sometimes you have to do it forcefully. And that's why I set alarms. Once 12 o'clock hits, I need to stop being on the computer, stuff like that.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time, Reese. Before we end this, can you introduce us to that little cutie in the background? Who's that?
Him?
Oh.
This is Squid.
Oh.
He's the best boy.
Does it help you turn off, does it, when you need to move away? Oh, amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time, Reese. I really appreciate you taking the time to dive into that with us. And
Yeah.
I hope all you people in the audience managed to enjoy the chat and glean some little bits of information. If you have any more questions, no, please, by all means, like you said, you are different, but it's still a superpower, right? So it's not that big of a deal. So if you have any more questions, everybody, if you just want to chuck them in the questions chat, I'm sure Reese is happy to talk to you via message if you have anything. And other than that, I think that'll do it. So I hope you all have a lovely morning, day, or evening, and take care of yourselves.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
See you later.